The end result of the 2013 legislative session will be felt by many Minnesotans. In just a few days, on July 1st, dozens of new laws take effect. Here to discuss the impact of those is Senate Majority Leader Tom Bakk. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Senator, let's begin with some of those changes that do take place, as I said, on July 1st. Many of these laws were wrapped in big omnibus bills. Which ones do you think are going to impact Minnesotans the most?
Well, there were a lot of provisions passed relative to property tax relief and education funding. New money for early childhood scholarships, free all-day kindergarten for every kindergartner in the state, a 2-year freeze in college tuition at our MnSCU campuses, a 1-year freeze at the University of Minnesota in undergraduate tuition, cities and counties who currently have to pay sales tax on their purchases now will not be subjected to sales tax anymore. That's going to save cities about $100 million a year. Currently, they're having to levy property taxes in order to pay the state that sales tax. Additional money in the renter's credit, additional money in the property tax refund program that people are eligible for. So I would argue a very strong session for property taxpayers and for education.
Okay, and Amazon, let's go back to the tax bill in particular, and one portion of that was the excuse me, the sales tax on internet purchases. Amazon recently announced that it's going to end its relationship with many affiliates in Minnesota who direct online users to their website. So did you anticipate any other potential fallout as a result of this portion of the tax bill?
Well, that's a provision that I initially carried probably back in 2007 or 2008. The state of New York was the first state to impose the sales tax on online sales. Now, what citizens need to know is the sales tax is still owed when you make a purchase online, but if the business doesn't have a physical presence in Minnesota, they don't have an obligation to collect it. But you still, as the purchaser, have an obligation to pay it, and it's called a use tax. But compliance is very low, so the Amazon provision, as it's commonly referred to, simply has the retailer collect it at the point of sale rather than have the actual purchaser remit it to the Department of Revenue when they file their income tax.
So what kind of message do you think it sends for Amazon to say, well, it's going to pull its business with the Minnesota affiliates?
Well, Amazon came to see me back when I was tax chair in probably 2007, 2008, when I initially proposed it when it had been done in New York and prevailed at the district court level in New York. I tried to do it in Minnesota then. And when they came to see me, they said, well, Senator, you don't understand. If you ask Amazon to collect sales tax, we're not going to do business in Minnesota any longer. I said, oh, really? I said, let me explain something to you. I said, if I need a toaster, I'm going to buy a toaster. Which means if I can't buy it online, I'm going to buy it from a brick and mortar store in Minnesota. It's a very, very important provision. It was supported strongly by a lot of Minnesota businesses and big ones, including Target and Best Buy. It was the #1 priority of the Minnesota Retailers Association for several sessions now. Our online bricks and mortar stores are real competitive advantages when companies like Amazon can come into Minnesota and sell products and avoid the sales tax. And Best Buy sent a very strong message to the Capitol, and the way they would talk about it is our stores are just becoming showrooms. Customers will come to our store, they'll browse through the television sets or whatever electronics equipment they want to buy, they'll decide what they want to buy, and then they'll go home and they'll buy it online to avoid the sales tax. And on a large purchase, $1,000 or $1,500 television set, it's real savings when they're allowed to get free shipping. So it was really putting Minnesota businesses at a real competitive disadvantage to online sellers. And even though I've heard from some constituents who are doing some online business that are upset about it, it really is the right tax policy.
Let's talk about a few other issues that seem to be bubbling to the surface a little bit related to the tax bill. One is the sales tax on farm machinery repair services, and another would be the sales tax on storage units. What are you hearing from businesses and farmers as you travel the state right now and as these provisions become?
Well, not a lot yet, because I think people really haven't digested some of the sales tax changes. What I wanted to do, and that were initiatives on the part of the Senate, is I wanted to do sales tax reform. We proposed a much broader program that was finally enacted into law. Our provision would have actually lowered the sales tax rate from 6.5% down to 6%. But the governor didn't want to impose any new sales taxes on consumers. And what I wanted to do in the context of larger sales tax reform was take the sales tax off of cities and counties. I think it's very poor tax policy to have them collect sales tax or remit sales tax and have to collect property taxes to pay it. And then I wanted to do the upfront exemption on capital equipment for business purchases. Very expensive, about $150 million to allow businesses to get an upfront exemption versus having to go through the refund process. The governor had a lot of anxiety about sales tax reform. He had proposed a larger, much broader sales tax reform proposal early in the session that he later backed away from. But he did want to do those two provisions that I wanted to do. So we went looking for, is there a menu of sales tax provisions that we could enact to pay for these two reforms that I think most Minnesotans agree are the right policy. And those are the things we settled on, and we specifically delayed the warehousing sales tax provision until next April because it hadn't been well vetted over at the Department of Revenue, and we're not sure what potential implications are. I met with some representatives of warehousers earlier this week, and have told them, you have to bring me real examples. You just can't say it's going to hurt my business. You have to show me real examples of where business is going to leave Minnesota and not going to warehouse here any longer because of this tax provision. And if there are unintended consequences in that, it's something we'll certainly revisit next year.
Okay, and let's look ahead to next year a little bit. There are many issues that remain unresolved at the end of last session, and some of those include, some of the higher profile ones included the anti-bullying bill, minimum wage, and transportation funding, just to name a few. So what do you expect work-wise to happen over the interim?
Well, it'll be a pretty brief session next year. It's not our budget year. I'd like to see it something less than 10 or 12 weeks if we can. We're going to go in on February 25th. There will be some committee hearings over that time to talk about some of those issues. The bullying bill passed the House, and it was on the Senate floor, but we just ran out of time. So in the Senate, it's laid on the table, I believe, in the Senate. I think something will pass on that next year. I don't know, I believe we call it the Safe Schools bill. I don't know if the House version that's passed is a lot different. Really, there was one piece of legislation that's critically important that we get passed next year. The Senate passed it, and the House did not get to it yet. And it addresses the Minnesota sex offender program. We have the federal courts breathing down our neck here that when people have served their allotted time in prison under the Constitution, they have to be released. But we're currently moving them, once they've served their time, over to a civil commitment program called the Minnesota Sex Offender Program. The federal courts are weighing in and saying you do not have the right to incarcerate people indefinitely once they've served their term. So the facility we currently have them in is much like a prison, and we're going to have to find some alternative ways to house them in less restrictive environments than a prison environment, or I believe the federal governments are going to come in and take over our program. It's critically important. It should have got done this year. Fortunately, the Senate did get around to it. I expect the House is going to get around to that relatively early in this session.
Okay, Senator, my last question for you is there have been several news articles in a variety of newspapers on potential political fallout because of some of the ways legislators voted on various issues or didn't vote, and it goes in both parties. Some examples were the tax bill and same-sex marriage. So now, what do you think? As Majority Leader, it's part of your role to try to mitigate any political damage. Do you anticipate putting out a lot of fires? What have you been hearing so far?
Well, the Senate's not on the ballot until 2016. So historically, the Senate has always been probably a little more aggressive in the first year of a four-year term. For instance, the Senate did actually vote on a large transportation package that would have invested a significant amount of money in our roads and bridges through a gas tax, expanded the transit build-out both in the metropolitan area and in outstate Minnesota. But that's tough politics in an election year, so I don't know if the House and the governor are going to be willing to consider that this year or not. I think something's probably likely going to happen on the minimum wage, might even happen federally. So this will be the year also where we make a decision what voters might expect to see on the ballot in the form of proposed constitutional amendments. This will be the year where we do a pretty substantial bonding bill. They're historically done in non-budget years. So I think you'll see a bonding bill in the neighborhood of $800 million to $850 million probably in a bonding bill. this next session. I think we'll have pretty strong bipartisan support for that. There's a lot of good projects in both Democratic and Republican districts.
So you're not too worried about political fallout in the Senate based on other votes?
Well, there always is. There's a certain number of districts that are swing districts that go back and forth, Democrat and Republican, depending on voter turnout. Democrats tend to do better in presidential years than in non-presidential years because turnout's higher, and for some reason in Minnesota that's favored Democrats over the decades. So I think most people, if history means anything, expect Democrats to have a little bit tougher election year than they had in 2012. I think the election, voters clearly saw a contrast between the previous biennium with Republican control. I often have told people what a difference an election makes. I mean, a year ago we were sitting here preparing, or 2 years ago, in the 2011 session with the Republican legislature. Right now, today, we were planning for a government shutdown. Ended up in an extended one, longest one in the country's history. We ended up resolving it by historic borrowing from our K-12 schools, eliminating the homestead credit that homeowners saw. What a contrast if you fast forward to this budget session 2 years later. You see significant investments in K-12, all-day kindergarten, early childhood, property tax relief, restoring the state and local government relationships by putting new state money into the local government aid and county program aid programs so the state can be a stronger partner in delivering services at the local level. And I think voters will decide whether they view that as a successful session, as progress, or not. And certainly there will be Republican seats that become Democratic in this election. There will be Democratic ones that likely become Republican. I think the governor will get reelected. I think the governor's done a very, very good job. I see his poll numbers look very favorable. And I'm very much looking forward to serving with him in this next session.
Senate Majority Leader Tom Bakk, we finally ran out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.